So now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Emma Ballment, Director of Ipsos Marketing, Strategy, and Understanding. Emma, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you all my attendees for being here today. Welcome as we engage you in this year's Vantage webinar and come together as we celebrate our 10th edition of the Ipsos Vantage Report, illuminating food service industry market trends. Again, I'm Emma Ballman, Director of Ipsos Strategy and Understanding, and it's been my pleasure to be a food and beverage researcher since 2008 to dedicate my career to this initiative. I was encouraged to share a little fun food fact about myself. A few years ago, when I was facing leaving Toronto to find a home to raise my kids, I chose the town in which I lived in based on the types of restaurants that I could find there, because I did not want to leave behind South Asian cuisine as I moved out to the suburbs. What I want to dial up a bit today is about how you restaurateurs are great at bringing people together. You are community hubs. In this atmosphere, let's really think about the value that we bring customers. And we do a lot more than just fill bellies. We feed souls and facilitate relationships. Restaurants, you are integral to our community culture. Whether they're one-on-one interactions for a quick visit, whether we're immersed in community dining experiences, or bringing the restaurant into the intimacy of our own home. And I want to congratulate you. You have come together in collaboration and competition to raise the value of this industry to new heights over a tumultuous past few years. The industry has now reached over $103 billion value this year. It's still growing at a modest pace of 1%, despite all the challenges that we face. So congratulations. Of course, as I'm very proud to announce this, we have to be a bit pragmatic in understanding the opportunity and work that we still have to do. While we're attracting over 9 billion heads through the door in the past year, we're not reaching our full potential as traffic is declining and customers are second-guessing restaurants at every turn. Population still growing, but traffic is down 3% on the year. And while there are positive indications in the first quarter of 2025, as we received a little bit of those tax breaks, overall, we still have ground to make up as the new heights of market value have reached on the back of a smaller pool of daily users. We have potential. Back in 2015, when we started tracking in the Food Service Monitor, 41% of Canadian adults visited food service on an average day. And that number just hasn't come back to pre-pandemic levels, meaning a missed opportunity of over 3 million daily users in Canadian adults. Now, traditional restaurants have been more resilient. Some silver lining here. While food service traffic is down 3%, quick service restaurants continue to see positive traffic momentum. Full service restaurants, traffic is a bit soft, but outperforms market trends. Where we see some challenges, non-commercial is actually doing fairly well. Where we see challenges is in HMR, convenience and gas food service. Fully prepared and immediately consumed foods and beverages that we source from retail. As we walk into these environments and are trying to make good on our intentions to cook more at home, becomes a little more salient in these environments. And what is continuing to drive customers out to restaurants are things that quick service and full service restaurants deliver a little better on, which we'll illuminate today. As we share some of the opportunities and trends to drive back traffic growth to restaurants, to identify those pockets of opportunity to bring back lapsed users in terms of who we're targeting and the occasions and motivations in which we're targeting them, to predict, react, and strategize in this uncertain impact of Canadian loyalism and the rally cry of Buy Canadian and how this might impact us and who might be following through on these intentions. Getting a little emotional, a little personal. And what's a strength for restaurants right now? What's bringing head through the door and willingness to spend in the EaterTainment occasions and easing tensions? Where do these trends come from? We haven't just plucked them out of the air. These trends are fueled by our observations from our syndicated data set, fueling food and beverage insights in Canada, primarily from our food service monitor. That's a daily tracking of past day food service visits, everything that was consumed and the occasion dynamics and attitudinal and behavioral features of those occasions. And in the context of our other suite of syndicated products, like the 5 consumption tracker that gives us a big picture view of overall eating trends, some specifics into alcohol consumption trends. And we brought in a little bit of contextual trends from our Ipsos Essential Monitor, the attitudes, sentiments, and behaviors that reflect the big picture influencing our industry. Well, to get into those opportunities for recovering traffic, food service, I believe, food service is for all. But there are some Canadians in our community who are facing more barriers to participating in the cultural institution that is restaurants. I'll bring up a little example from a local restaurant, one of my favorite local restaurants, not to choose favorites, in Ajax, Karahi Point, a casual restaurant specializing in Pakistani cuisine. Now, for the years since I've known this restaurant, they've always had this policy, pay only when you like our food. But I doubt they have to make good on very often, so they're quite delicious. But these features, they reduce the penalty when right now people are questioning whether or not they should be going out to restaurants. This helps people feel a little more comfortable in exploring and trying something new. And a recent promotion this restaurant's engaging in is where the owner operator and patrons can contribute to a program to pin up receipts for meals that if those who are in need of a meal and have nothing to pay can come in and claim. Now, what am I saying? Am I trying to tell you to start giving away everything for free and be as generous and altruistic as Karahi Point? Not necessarily. But I thought that this provides an example how, depending on the fit for your brand, consumers and operators are becoming increasingly aware and empathetic to the fact that all of us are having to second guess whether or not we can visit restaurants, whether we can afford that food service spend. Never in my career have I put up 100% of respondents say anything that wasn't a screener. And this hasn't always been the case. It used to be 80%, 70%, but today every single one of our respondents are telling us that they are trying to manage their food service spend in one form or another, typically driven by reasons such as seeking to make fewer visits, choose more affordable venues, more affordable items, using coupons, avoiding delivery fees, forgoing the beverage, or forgoing extras like desserts and side dishes and appetizers. And now, affluent consumers have the privilege of perhaps stopping at just fewer visits or the venue that they choose. Lower income consumers do have to engage in more of these tactics at every point of their restaurant journey, overall impacting their spend to a greater degree. Do we want food service to become a luxury just for the affluent? Perhaps I'm a little bit hyperbolic, but we don't want to undercut the value of the consumer from the under 80K income group. It makes up half of our visits to food service. And this is where, while every group from the affluent, the middle class to the working class is cutting back on daily restaurant visits, that penetration opportunity, that daily incidence opportunity exists in all class groups. The under 80 income group is taking more than their fair share of the loss of restaurant traffic. Now I had to ask myself too, to what degree is this a reflection of the floor coming up and the average income rising, and incomes are not rising as quickly as inflation? I checked in with our colleagues in the Canadian Financial Monitor who can confirm suspicions that yes, the population is shifting. They're coming up in the world and they're shifting out of the under 50K and into the 50K, and everyone's moving up a bit. But that traffic declines from the under 50K is a little bit of both, a declining incidence rate and declining existence in the population. But that 50 to 80K is all about declining food service visits, not declining existence in the population. In the full report, we investigate on these different sides of the income gap, where are the opportunities in terms of the types of occasions and the types of venues that need traffic recovery or that we can lean into based on where they're willing to go and where they're willing to spend. And they are united in some features that both of them are driving the growth of dine-in and the growth of the more affordable, comforting breakfast occasion, but they're separated from some degrees of service. So food service guests from households under 80K, they're the ones really having to trade down into QSR, putting more of their visits into fast food and coffee shops. They're cutting out of the takeout occasions that are occasions that are a little more easier to replace from home. And they're cutting back on that big ticket dinner item while still coming out for breakfast. While the households over 80K, they're still able to invest in making the most of it and going to FSR more often. While they're engaging in that same declining takeout occasion, they're taking those visits out of some smaller check items, cutting back on snacking, for example, still visiting for breakfast and keeping those dinner occasions. We can see that the things that we have to do without may differ a little bit depending on what side of the income divide we are on. But they share a commonality in that both sides of the income divide are holding on to more emotional, connective occasions. The occasions that we're seeing we need to recover in traffic, they're really fundamental. When we ask consumers, why did you visit that restaurant that you visited yesterday? We craft these need states that drive operator choice and drive restaurant visits. Those top reasons like craveable reward, hunger fill, and convenience are just not cutting it anymore. And this is why we see things like takeout declining. These are occasions that are more easy to compete with the home environment. But what continues to drive strength are these emotional, social, experiential, connective occasions. Now, of course, while both income groups are contributing to these trends, how they can execute on them, where they visit, the things that they order within these types of occasions will differ according to their needs. So how we execute depending on who our targets are, choosing who our targets are, will differ. So growth and change in the food service industry is getting a little personal. It's very emotional, but it's also hitting a little bit below the belt. As we are facing down some really uncertain, unpredictable influences that are going to shift the flow of traffic as we try to recover it, as we rally behind the banner of Canadian loyalism, elbows up. I ask myself, post-globalism, what does it mean to be a Canadian chain? If you ask a consumer or you ask a business person or marketer, someone in the industry, you might come up with a different answer and how you might draw that divide. And as we watch how different restaurants react, we start to wonder, does it really matter where the owner sits? Is it enough that a restaurant employs and is operated by members of our community, serves Canadian chicken, and invests in local charities? In our culture of embracing multiculturalism, it's Canadian enough that new Canadian families open up restaurants that bring a taste from home. Is it necessary that to be a Canadian restaurant that you've been opened and operated in the community since bell bottoms came in fashion the first time? And I think customers are open to being convinced to these degrees, but we have to ask ourselves, what can we expect as this trend starts to take on personality and meaning as things are constantly changing? So to make predictions about the influence of the Canadian loyalism trend, we've taken a look at a long existing trend in our database and in our culture of the local enthusiast. The local enthusiast is well ingrained in Canada, but they don't always follow through. So past decade, restaurant visitors who identify as preferring local independent restaurants, the national chains, have existed about 3 out of 10 of our respondents every year, pretty steadily, identify as a local enthusiast. But in terms of local food driving actual restaurant choice, that's always sat around only 15%, as even the local enthusiast will still only choose about 19% of their restaurants for that desire for local food. Local enthusiasts, those who prioritize small independent restaurants, they do make good on exploring more independence, but they joined the locally ambivalent and gravitating towards the top 10 chains in recent years. If we take a look at where local enthusiasts visit versus the average customer, they still, despite claiming to prioritize local restaurants, they still take a third of their visits to the top 10 QSR chains versus the local ambivalent taking 45%. And both of these groups over the past several years have gravitated more of their traffic share towards these top 10 chains. And typically, who the local enthusiast customer has been has reflected the needs and connections and identities of some smaller cultural subgroups in our communities, connecting with smaller ethnic groups, connecting with the queer community, connecting with ESG prioritizers. But the customer that's going to be joining the Canadian loyalists, will we be able to say the same thing about them? Will it be reaching the progressives in the community or reaching more of the average consumer? There's a new piece on the board that could change the local enthusiasts into the Canadian loyalists. From our Ipsos Essential tracker, back in March, things are already changing. We're asking this every month. Back in March, these impending tariffs were felt by Canadians to pose a high and moderate risk to us personally, professionally, and politically. And things have been changing, pulling back, but the damage is almost done. They're having a measurable impact on intentions to buy Canadian products, shop at Canadian retailers, and avoid American products. So we ask ourselves, how might this impact restaurant traffic? We've already seen some reports from different industry leaders about how they've been feeling this so far. But if we could predict how this might shift the flow of traffic and share of traffic to different types of restaurants, we can take a look at how local enthusiasts have behaved up to this point, and that they don't always follow through on their intentions to visit local restaurants, taking about 33% of top chains. And I don't think it'd be too much to say, what if this group of consumers doubled in the Canadian loyalism trend? And if another 30% of restaurant visitors began to behave like local enthusiasts and take about a third of their visits to top 10 QSR chains, this could mean a shift of 330 million visits a year away from those top 10 chains towards primarily independents and towards some smaller, medium-sized chains. Now, I don't take any pride in saying that. I have to be professional, objective, and impartial. But I will say I do take comfort in hearing the positive messages that are coming out from individuals, from politicians, and from tourism boards, declaring themselves friends and neighbors and partners to Canada, such that I think consumers will embrace these positive turn of events to ultimately allow restaurants to do what you do best in bringing us together. Which brings me to one of our positive trends drivers in food service industry today. Despite all the pressures and negative vibes we're feeling, there is positive, emotional flow of growth in the restaurant industry as it relates to, first off, EaterTainment trend. As customers are second guessing their food service spend and making good on intentions to cook more at home, we see most of that traffic, as I mentioned before, coming out of takeout and functional eating occasions. So we've seen some businesses like meal prep services take advantage of this, kind of meeting customers in the middle with sourcing from home with a little bit of food service preparation thrown in. Where food service just competes better, you just can't compete with food service, is that they're bringing us together again, bringing us to dine-in occasions, recovering. Now, before the pandemic, we were embracing off-premise, we were embracing delivery, we were embracing takeout, we were embracing drive-through, and that was allowing food service to take share from in-home. I like to tell you what happened during the pandemic, but we've been on a path of recovery, of driving growth, dine-in occasions, and that trajectory is continuing as people want to be back in restaurants again. And some of that fastest growth is even as QSR develops its dine-in traffic a little bit faster, as even more affluent guests start to trade down and consider QSR for more of their dine-in visits. just in case anyone needs a little bit of clarification, I'm talking about FSR, that's full service restaurants, QSR, quick service restaurants like coffee shops and fast food, all contributing to this growth of the dine-in traffic. Dining in is all about entertaining family and friends at the restaurant. I want to introduce you to a couple of need states. We ask consumers, as I mentioned, why you pick the restaurants that you pick in the previous day. We have multiple reasons happening all at once, guiding our restaurant choices, and we consolidate these into need states of similar themes, like the social confidence needs, where we need an environment that helps us bond and connect and celebrate with other people, a restaurant that helps us consider the emotions of others and our own emotions and the impressions that we make on people, and helps us have a good time, fun experiences, an atmosphere, whether it's for family-friendly atmosphere or more of a social friends type of experience. We're trying to create highly enjoyable experiences for customers. Dine-in is really all about having a good time. We look at the most differentiating needs for the dine-in occasion versus off-premise. FSR, of course, really leads this. Social confidence. The number one, 62% of FSR dine-in restaurants are chosen for this social confidence need state, index at 171 compared to off-premise, and driving growth in traffic for full-service restaurants. QSR, we've got some other needs on our mind, being quick, cheap, and cheerful. And but when we're choosing to visit QSR for dine-in, we do have an elevated consciousness around that social confidence need state, and it is driving growth for QSR. On the other hand, that number two differentiator for the dine-in occasion, 53% of restaurants chosen for dine-in in the past day at FSR, much more important than off-premise occasions and driving growth. Now, QSR has elevated importance, but they're not necessarily participating in the growth of this trend like full-service restaurants. The interesting thing too is while we see declines coming from the off-premise traffic, what continues to be compelling for off-premise, like delivery or takeout, are socially driven occasions. Well, we don't typically think of off-premise when we have these social confidence needs. They are increasingly important to the FSR off-premise channel, increasingly important to the QSR off-premise channel. Of course, it's less about environment in those cases and more about the bonding and more about the emotions and feeling appreciated and being happy. And part of what's driving this is that younger consumers are more willing to think outside of the box for how they're going to source, where they're going to visit, the types of foods they're going to order to facilitate these social confidence types of occasions. Visiting, of course, FSR dine-in, but more likely to consider QSR dine-in or FSR or QSR off-premise. Of course, it's a bit of a life hack that's a way to manage spend. Now, QSR, of course, is going to be more affordable all around, whether you're dine-in or off-premise for social confidence occasions. But at full-service restaurants, you can save a pretty penny just taking that restaurant food home to eat, to host your guests at home. And part of this is because of the alcohol inclusion, or the beverage inclusion. 22% of on-premise social confidence occasions include alcohol from the restaurant versus few and far between at home. That said, alcohol occasions are still a source of growth for full-service restaurants, driving 11% in occasion growth, where that softness in full-service restaurant traffic is coming from alcohol-free occasions. Now, that said, under considerations for both price and health, this is happening in an environment of moderation. Consumers are trying to consider, if I'm going to be drinking, I'm going to make sure it's social. I'm not drinking alone, so I'm having social drinking occasions. I'm not having as many rounds, as many servings of alcohol. Maybe I'm offsetting them with some lower alcohol or non-alcoholic beverages. Evidencing how consumers are seeking this upliftment in these social atmospheres from restaurants. And while we're seeking social upliftment, we're also seeking personal upliftment. So restaurants are providing a great value in easing the tensions that Canadians are feeling today, creating a very permissible reason to spend at restaurants. Now, I'm not a registered psychotherapist or anything. I can't necessarily say that younger generations have greater emotional intelligence, or perhaps they just exhibit it in different ways. But what I can tell you is that younger generations are more willing to say that they choose their restaurants and they choose their food and beverages because of the direct impacts they have on how they're feeling and how they're thinking. And the weight of the world is on our shoulders. The top worries that are facing Canadians today, as we track in our Ipsos Essential Tracker: economy, no surprise, should come as no surprise to any of you: economy, politics, and still COVID and health-related concerns. Of course, the younger feel the pressure of the economy a little stronger, the older feel the pressure of politics and health a little more strongly. But over half of us agree that we believe our worries pose a moderate to high risk on our health and well-being. Just be more aware of how this is impacting us. And a significant portion of Canadians agree that we're using food and beverages to manage our health and wellness, that mental health is as important as physical health. And we're feeling stressed. Everybody take a deep, calming breath. But younger generations will turn to restaurants to reduce their mental load. 45% of Gen Z choose their restaurant the previous day because of this mental uplift need. And younger generations are changing what mental uplift means. It's not just about a break and a pick-me-up. It's very specific about how this visit helps me focus, helps me think, relieves my stress and anxiety, or promotes mental harmony and inner balance. And while those social connection occasions may be big, important social occasions, mental uplift would be more simple, more permissible, affordable indulgence, something that QSR is really a leader in. A mental uplift driving 42% of past day QSR visits. A little bit of special strength, the drive-through, driving the mental uplift need. Because a lot of times beverages are meeting these needs for us, over-indexing in the mental uplift occasion. But as things have been changing over the past few years, we're moving away from beverages and we're moving into foods to meet these mental uplift occasions. Some of the choices that we're changing is, hot coffee is one of those go-to as a coffee enthusiast. Hot coffee is one of those go-tos to the mental uplift occasion, but that's being swapped out mostly by categories preferred by youth. While the alcohol trend I mentioned earlier is not necessarily a youth-driven category, but the growth for iced coffee, fruit drinks, and energy drinks are taking over. We even see some of the top coffee chains investing in these more fruity, energy-related beverages and investing in their iced coffee offerings. We're moving back into sweet baked goods. You couldn't give sweet baked goods away 10 years ago. And now all of a sudden, it's permissibility to eat them again. And growth in comfort foods, in burgers and fries. Again, 10 years ago, people were moving away from these top ingrained items, but in that search for comfort and upliftment and nostalgia and affordability, we're moving back into some of these comfort foods like burgers and fries. And now as we close out this session, think about how some of the challenges I've presented today are they're practical, but also personal. But the opportunities that we have, solutions that we can create, are also in these realms, the practical and the personal. As we outline the opportunities to get more heads through the door and protect our share as the flow of traffic is put under pressure. And our opportunities to connect with guests socially, on and off premise, and investing in their emotional well-being as members of our community. So we can come together as a restaurant industry to continue to be resilient against all of these challenges that we've been facing. Deliver affordability and value for every class of customer. Communicate a welcoming permissibility for Canadian loyalists. Facilitate those social gatherings, large and small. and market to the benefits in emotional and mental well-being. All of these trends and opportunities will be displayed, illuminated, sized, trended in the release of the 10th edition of the Vantage Report 2025, available next week to our clients. So thank you everyone for joining me today. That concludes our presentation. I will now go see if we can address any questions. Of course, if anyone is unable to stick around with us, we will follow up. We can address your questions personally. Let me just press a couple buttons. So a popular question is typically around, what does this mean for my categories? My food specialist, I'm a burger operator, or I supply chicken to restaurants. How are different foods performing? While we do see a recession of choices into main dishes, away from beverages, avoiding some appetizers and desserts, and we see a consolidation around those entrees, specifically beverage type entrees. More illumination will be provided for each of our clients as we delve into the delivery of the Vantage Report. There is an element of tailoring for each of the clients so that each of these trends will be sized up against the impact of your particular categories or cross-competitive categories will be available for each client. Good question. So an interesting thing happened with relationship to coffee. So coffee is one of those categories that has just been riding the waves of the pandemic and the move in and out of home. And coffee is one of those things that we really grasped onto with the move back in home. And a lot of those in-home providers really took advantage of that and did a lot of things to help make it easy to stay home and not come back to restaurants. So coffee is one of the things that have been slower to come back to restaurants. And interestingly enough, well, the past decade, it's all about the growth of hot specialty coffee, lattes, espressos, cappuccinos, iced coffee. In terms of a hot environment, we're actually seeing a little bit of a reverse of these trends with a bit of a receding back to the brewed coffee, but slow down in some of the hot specialty coffees. Now that said, predictors of the continued relevance of hot specialty coffee, like young, diverse consumers, continue to be relevant. The iced coffee category that continues to invest in itself continues to drive growth for restaurants. Oh, okay, that's a good question. I talked about the retail category taking on a little bit more brunt of the declines of the past years. Wouldn't count retail food service out just yet. Retail food service was riding a wave of innovation and developing and growing over the past few years, and it is still miles ahead of where it was pre-pandemic. It was one of the first categories to really recover. And while in this atmosphere of making choices about cooking more at home and having that comparative ability against retail, a lot of what's keeping down C&G food service or HMR food service is really about those immediately consumed, like pre-packaged, prepared things that are really easy to compare to value to grocery, like snacks and bottled or canned beverages. But what continues to be a strength for C&G and grocery is that hot, prepared, fresh food that is competing with QSR, because that is where they can actually really deliver a relatively good value point and save a few bucks compared to QSR by sourcing that fast food meal from convenience and gas, for example, versus QSR. So while they struggle with some of that prepared and packaged food versus grocery, they actually have relative strength and growth in the fresh, hot investments that leading chains have made. I think with that, we will catch up on any other questions that come through and follow up with you all individually. We'll follow up with everyone, pass out the recording by tomorrow, and look forward to speaking with everyone. Thank you.
Well, I just would like to jump in, Emma, and thank you so much for today's insightful discussion. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As Emma said, a link to today's recorded presentation will come in the next day or two. Also, we have some handouts in the control panel that you can take a look at in the meantime. And of course, please do reach out to us directly. That now concludes today's amazing webinar. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.